Hey there, Deluxe fans! Hope you're feeling particularly magical today. In Disney's newest animated hit, Encanto, the audience and fans were treated to a fresh take on a movie about family values. The plot of Encanto takes place in Colombia and is centered around Mirabel, the sole member of the Madrigal family that had not been granted a magical ability when she came of age. However, when the miracle that saved the Madrigal family decades ago begins to fade and disappear, it was up to Mirabel to save her family's gifts. An interesting detail about Encanto is that, though they mention the miracle a lot, there is no direct explanation as to what the miracle actually was or is. Lucky for us, one dedicated fan came up with a theory that seems to be backed up by some pretty solid proof throughout the film. We all know one of the best sources of fan theories nowadays is fans from Reddit. This is because Reddit is typically made up of various communities that each flock to specific subreddits that are based on the content they want to talk about. Well, much like every other Disney movie, fans went wild on Reddit with fan theories about certain aspects of Encanto, and we found one theory particularly interesting. A Redditor by the username Cody Chaotix came up with the concept that the miracle that saved the Madrigals all those years ago, as well as their casita, were both powered by Abuelo Pedro. This theory in particular is fantastic because it not only is the exact thing that you would expect Disney to do, but it also adds another layer of depth to the relationship between casita and each of the Madrigal family members. Not to mention it lines up perfectly with the history of the miracle. Abuela Alma told Mirabel that the miracle began right after her late husband was murdered while trying to save Alma and her 3 children. It wasn't until after her husband had died that the candle began to burn brighter, and the mountains began to move to form an impenetrable wall around Alma and the rest of the villagers. At the same time that this happened, the magical casita was also formed to shelter and care for the Madrigal family as they began to grow. Both casita and the gifts that are given to each of the members of the Madrigal family were both created as forms of protection for the family. The same sort of protection that Pedro would have provided for his family if he were still alive to be with them. But since he's not, his spirit provided them with the protection in the form of a miracle. The evidence that the Redditor used to support this theory seems almost too good to be true, and really got us considering the theory to be true. If you have seen Disney's Encanto, you likely realize how prominent and important of a symbol the butterfly was throughout the film. I mean, you could find butterflies in the background of almost every scene, whether they be embroidered onto clothing or carved into patterns on the walls of casita. There were butterflies everywhere. There was even a butterfly engraved onto the side of the candle that was directly connected to the Madrigals and their gifts. You can also see actual butterflies fluttering around in the background of the movie at times. Now, when it comes to symbolism, butterflies can mean many different things depending on cultures and beliefs. To many people, the butterfly is a symbol of transformation or change, and some even see it as a symbol of hope and spiritual rebirth. As for the butterflies in Encanto, it would seem that they were used to symbolize love and the transformation or growth that the Madrigal family had to experience. There was one butterfly in the film that the directors of Encanto seemed to focus on a bit more heavily than the rest, and that was specifically the yellow butterfly. Whenever something important was going on during the movie, or whenever a family member needed guidance, you can actually spot a yellow butterfly leading the way. The directors of Encanto have said that they were inspired to use the yellow butterfly by the way that the author Gabriel Garcia Marquez frequently used it in his novels as a symbol for peace, hope, and love. This theory adds even more depth to the meaning behind the yellow butterfly, with the Redditor and fans who support the theory believing that the butterfly is actually meant to represent Abuelo Pedro, who's sticking close by his family to guide them from the afterlife. If that's true, it would certainly explain why butterflies tend to hang around the Madrigal family so much. I mean, besides the fact that butterflies are really common in Colombia, with there being more than 3,600 different species of butterfly throughout the country. And as we mentioned just a second ago, the yellow butterfly is particularly important in Encanto because it helps the family to see the right path, which is why it would make perfect sense for the butterfly to be a representation of Pedro. There was even a moment when Alma is talking to Pedro, asking for his guidance from beyond the grave, just hoping that his spirit is there to hear her, and how does he respond? He sends her Mirabel, an ambitious, kind, and optimistic Madrigal, who's covered from head to toe in butterfly pattern embroidered clothes. Mirabel, like the yellow butterfly, helps to guide the Madrigal family out of difficult times, and eventually saves the miracle. What's interesting about Mirabel is that she always happens to be the first member of her family that notices the yellow butterfly whenever it appears to guide them. During the scene where we see Bruno perform his ritual to see Mirabel's future for the second time, it all seems to point to the miracle and casita being destroyed. That is, until Mirabel noticed the yellow butterfly, and she and Bruno follow it to the vision of Mirabel reconciling with her sister to strengthen the miracle. But notice how Mirabel Mirabel was drawn to the yellow butterfly before Bruno. This happened again towards the end of the film when Mirabel and Abuela Alma are sitting by the river making amends with one another. It was Mirabel who saw the butterfly land on the exact spot that her Abuelo Pedro was slain, and it seemed like after noticing the graceful insect, Mirabel's hope was restored. She realized that with the help of everyone in the family, they could pick up the pieces of their shattered home and fix it without any of their gifts. This would also have been when Abuela realized that it was Pedro who sent Mirabel, and he sent her because he knew that she was what the Madrigal family needed to be saved. The yellow butterfly and Pedro were always hanging around to make sure that his family was safe, and that if they drifted apart, they would find each other again and remain a family. That's not all though. The theory also points out that the miracle and the magic that was blessed upon Pedro's family only came into existence after he sacrificed himself to save their lives. It wasn't until his death that the candle began to glow and sparkle, and the mountains closed off the villagers from the pursuing raiders. When Pedro sacrificed himself, he somehow managed to allow his spirit to hang around in order to look after his family and to help his family look after the people in the village. Beyond Pedro's connection with the butterflies in order to guide his family, the Reddit theory also brings up the idea that he was always around to protect his family, even if they didn't realize that it was him. You see, not only did the miracle form after Pedro's sacrifice, but so did Casita, which has led some fans to speculate that the living and loving house is actually possessed by their abuelo's spirit. This would explain why Casita is so protective of the family and always willing to help out. And surprisingly enough, there are some interesting character traits that Casita seems to share with the Madrigal's late abuelo. For instance, the few times that we see Pedro throughout the film are typically in the form of either a picture or a flashback, and it's hard not to notice that Pedro wasn't actually given any lines during his flashback. In fact, he doesn't appear to speak at all. His mouth only shows expressions. One thing he does do, however, is to wave. The first time that he and Abuela Alma saw each other from across the crowd of people, the two waved to one another. Now, I know that waving is a form of greeting and there isn't anything too special about it, but think about how Casita responds and reacts to their family, especially Mirabel. Casita waves to them by opening and closing its windows. Casita is also always looking to help the family members out in any way that they can, much like Abuelo Pedro would want to do. I mean, he sacrificed himself for them. I can't imagine that he wouldn't be a super helpful grandfather. In fact, when Mirabel is trying to help set up for Antonio's party, she mentions that the house isn't going to decorate itself, insinuating that Casita couldn't do it. And Casita got visibly sad because all it wanted to do was help. And then, of course, Mirabel reminds Casita that of course it could do it itself. It was simply an expression. Casita can be seen helping the Madrigals move things around throughout the house, and even move themselves around sometimes. If they are running late, it isn't afraid to remind them with an alarm clock, and then start shaking them around with the floorboards until they get moving. Casita helps the family clean up and put the dishes away much like an abuelo would, and make sure that people go where they need to go. Or in the case of the children that it was keeping from going upstairs, it keeps them away from where they aren't supposed to be. On top of that, it always seems to be protecting the family, much like Pedro did when he sacrificed himself to the bandits. Casita can be seen shifting its staircase into a slide in order to keep people from hurting themselves when they are falling. And right before it crumbles around Mirabel, the house made sure to move furniture around her and stack it up to protect her from falling debris, as a last-ditch effort to keep her safe, once again, just like Pedro would have done, and did when he died to save his family. When it comes down to it, Pedro really is in the center of it all, both literally and figuratively. You can see the large picture of him hanging in the middle of the house, which almost has a protective presence around it. The same sort of presence that Casita gives off when it's saving the Madrigals. With the portrait being there, Pedro is always looking over his family and protecting them from anything that would cause them harm, and he's doing it as Casita. This would also explain why the Casita would know so much about the Madrigal family. Not only does it know each of the family members by name, but it's able to create a magical room that is specifically designed for the needs of the user, meaning it had to know about each of the Madrigal family members' personalities, along with what they liked and disliked, and match that up with their gift to create a room specifically for them. It knows each of the family members on a very personal level, and it has a different connection with each one of them, much like a grandfather with his children and grandchildren. Casita shows time and time again that it will always be there for the Madrigals and will always watch over them, and that's exactly the sort of message that Abuelo Pedro would be putting out there. Not to mention the fact that Pedro's spirit becoming the magical home for the family to live in sounds exactly like something that Disney would do. Disney has always been known to hide subtle clues in plain sight like this, putting magic and possibility into even the finest of details throughout their movies. So to us and many fans, this theory doesn't seem too far-fetched. In fact, it's sort of the exact thing you would expect from Disney. They love to bring the spirits of ancestors or elders back into play. We saw Mufasa in the clouds back in 1994 when we watched The Lion King, or even Moana's grandmother when she was that beautiful manta ray. Disney loves to use the spirit of deceased elders to guide the protagonist and help them out along the way. So that would certainly be true for their newest film, Encanto, as well. If you're like us, you absolutely loved Encanto, and we're looking forward to all of the fan theories that have been popping up surrounding the movie. As far as this theory goes, I think it's certainly plausible for Pedro's spirit to have been around and helping the Madrigals in the form of their magical casita. But what do you guys think? Is this theory one that holds up for you? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. As for now, that's all, Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments, and like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.